Publishing is an old industry, and each step is fraught with rejection. It takes a huge amount of self belief or self delusion to persevere in this path. There are many things that I repeat encounter as an author and illustrator. The most common one I hear, though, is I have a book idea and I want it to be published, but I don't know how to do that. Congratulations. Writing a book is the hardest step of the entire process. So you're probably here because you have a book idea and you don't know how to get it published. In the next however long this video is, I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know about publishing, the different publishing paths, and all the different steps you can take to get your book published. Part 1, the 3 publishing paths. Let's start off by going over the 3 publishing paths. From a scale of like self-publishing to indie publishing to traditional publishing, we're going to talk about each of these and the pros and cons that come with each of them. Being self-published is when an author and illustrator publishes their own work independently. If you choose this path, you should know that you will pay for everything all by yourself. That includes art, marketing, editing, printing, any cost that would go with a book being published. You, as someone who is self-publishing, will pay for that. There are pros and cons to every single one of these things. So let's get into the pros of self-publishing. Your work is really yours. From your voice to all the creative decisions that you are making, you control every aspect of the publishing process, for better or worse. You can control distribution to see how you would like to publish your work. The great thing about this is if you want your work published as soon as possible, you can publish it as soon as possible. You don't need to wait for printing turnarounds. You don't necessarily even need to wait for editing turnarounds. Anything that would slow you down, you can cut out. Self-publishing has a stronghold online, specifically with TikTok. So the benefit of that is there are a lot of people ready to promote your work, especially if you've done it yourself. YouTube has a lot of how-tos on how to self-publish. There's a lot of information out there as to how to go about doing it. The biggest reason, though, that people self-publish is if you make it big, you don't have to share your profits. So the benefit of self-publishing really is that if you do strike it and your book happens to go viral online, it happens to be really fantastic, a lot of people are really interested in it, you get to net all of that profit. All of the book sales go to you unless you've signed agreements to distribute sales with anyone else. You get to reap the benefit of your risk. I would say that this makes self-publishing a really big risk versus big reward. So the cons of self-publishing, like I said earlier, for better or worse, you get to control every aspect of the publishing process. And if you're not willing to pay for other people's work, then you get to do that. This means that sometimes self-published works have blind spots where maybe the person didn't know enough about certain parts of the process, whether it be art or editing. Oftentimes because of this, as a whole, I'm not talking about individual case by case basis, but as a whole, self-publishing does often have a lot more errors and a lot more issues in the work itself. And this is because in indie and traditional publishing, you have an entire team to help you. There's an entire team of people who are experts in each of these different categories who can help. Sometimes self-published works can be expensive, and because of this, people often never turn a profit. And this is mostly because you control distribution. So if you aren't working with the teams of people who get your work into various avenues for your book to sell, schools, libraries, big bookstores, retail chains like Target, Costco, people have jobs in traditional publishing to get your work into these avenues. If you're doing this alone, you probably don't have the ability to get your work into those avenues. Because you control distribution and you aren't working with teams of people whose job is to get your book into big bookstores, chains like Target and Costco, or even schools and libraries, the difficulty is that your books will not be in those distribution avenues. And therefore, you'll have to be stuck with things like ebooks or other types of limited sales opportunities. Another con is that you have to do the marketing all by yourself. In addition to everything else, you have to, on top of that, be a pro at marketing your work. This means giveaways, TikToks, YouTube videos, any type of information that you are putting out to the world, marketing your book, you have to do yourself. This can be difficult, and often people underestimate the sheer amount of time that you have to commit to properly marketing a book. There's a reason why in traditional publishing, there's teams of people who do this. It's a really labor-intensive avenue for someone to do themselves on top of already putting their book out, writing it, editing it, getting the cover ready, designing it, all that. Another con is that many times trade reviewers won't review self-published works. I'm not saying that's fair. I'm just saying that these people often get tons of books every single season to review. And on top of all the ones that they have to review for all different sorts of publishers, various different types of authors. Self-published ones can often fall to the wayside and are not their first priority. So getting trade reviews can be critical to a book's success. And if you don't have the opportunity to get the same access to trade reviews or even know to get your book in front of trade reviews, that can be an issue for your book's lifespan. Independently published books. The second avenue of publishing I'm going to talk about is independent publishing. Independently publishing your work is when you publish through an indie publishing house. These publishing houses are not multinational corporations in the same way that the big five publishing houses are. When people say something is indie published, it can range from self-publishing to much larger houses that are independent but act more like a big five publisher. Sometimes people use the term indie publishing to mean self-publish, but the way I'm going to be referring to it is independent publishing can mean anything from someone who is a startup themselves or a company themselves, and also larger companies like Chronicle Books out of San Francisco, which is a huge and well-known indie publisher. Like traditional publish avenues, a lot of the pros are the same in indie publishing, meaning that when I talk about these things, these might be really similar to the pros and cons I'm going to list in traditional publishing. And that's just because, like I said earlier, some indie publishing houses are small and some are large. So like working at a big five traditional publishing house, a pro of indie publishing is that you might have a large team behind you helping you with your book, meaning editorial, art, marketing, and publicity, and more. This can ensure that you aren't doing everything yourself and you don't need to be a jack of all trades. It can also mean that you have an editor, an art director, a designer, and more to make sure that the book is being released into the world at a higher quality standard, and it will compete with other traditionally published books. Oftentimes, indie publishers will also distribute your book through various avenues like school and library, big bookstore markets, and depending on the publishing size, this is not a guarantee, but you have more access to it and the more likelihood that it will be up for similar awards and distributed in the same avenues that a traditional publishing book would be distributed in. One of the great pros about indie publishing too is that indie publishing houses don't have the same confines that a traditional publisher might have, and therefore they might be willing to take more risks on something that is a little bit more eclectic, a little bit more outside of the box of traditional publishing genres. This can make for some really beautiful and interesting books. Indie publishers have won major awards because they are willing to take these risks. That's not to say traditional publishing houses don't. It's just that indie publishing can often corner the edge on taking more risks. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, another pro of indie publishing is that because you have a team behind you, they'll put you up for a lot of the big awards. And you don't have to put yourself up for awards. You have a team ready who's access to all these things regularly, applies people to these things, and you can be in the running for some of the big awards, including the ALA awards. Cons of independent publishing. Because there's a real range in indie publishing, and it can range from anything from self-published to traditional publishing, there can be an inconsistent quality to what an independent publisher will put out. This means that the range can be from more like self-published books to traditional published books. Indie publishing, because it has such a range, can have similar pitfalls to self-publishing and similar pitfalls to traditional publishing. Traditional publishing, the third publishing path I'm going to talk about today. When people refer to traditionally published books, what they're referring to is the big five publishers: Penguin Random House, Hachette Book Group, Macmillan, HarperCollins, and Simon & Schuster. When a book is published by a large multinational corporation, it is distributed in all the traditional trade markets, and that's what makes it traditional publishing. Traditional publishing pros. You don't need to be the expert. You will have a team of people to help you with editing, art direction, design, marketing, and publicity, school and libraries, and a lot more. This means that those people get to be the expert in their field, and you get to focus on the writing or the artwork, depending on if you're an author or illustrator. This means your work will go to trade reviewers, because all the different people working at the publishing house have access to getting your work in front of the right people. Trade reviewers, awards lists, bloggers, any other sort of marketing and publicity that's necessary for a book to thrive. Your work will also be distributed in all the channels needed to make it sell. This includes big box stores, school and library, and even places like Costco, Target, anything like that. Your editorial team edits your work, and you have a copy editor. So that means that while you have fact-checked your work, ideally, your work shouldn't have glaring issues because you had multiple different eyes and experts looking at your work whose job it is to catch things like grammar, things like scientific accuracy, and all of that. You also have a design team and an art team whose job it is to make sure that your book is on trend, make sure that it's well designed, make sure that the cover is appealing. You can't judge a book by its cover, but most people do. This also means that these art teams are on top of current trends. They know what looks good. They know what's appealing in that genre that your book is in, and you don't have to worry about all that. Not to mention, they hire everyone who does the art and any other type of design, so you don't have to pay out of pocket for that. That's on the publishing house. You'll have access to international sales avenues and translation rights through your agency or the publishing house. It depends on how the rights are argued from your agent, but you will have access to your book being distributed widely. This is something that can also happen in indie publishing, but it is harder and it is on your dime in self-publishing. When I refer to other rights, I'm also including movie, audiobook, ebook, anything that's distributed using your book as the base. One of the biggest pros for traditional publishing, which is also applicable to indie publishing, is that you get paid to publish your work. Sometimes it can be lucrative to have your book be published, though most oftentimes it's just an okay amount. One of my favorite things about traditional publishing, and for some reason, this is something that I actually have to fact check in a lot of people who've gotten a different idea about this, you maintain the copyright to your art and your writing as a traditionally published author. This is the same actually as all of these avenues. In self-publishing, you should never give away your copyright. In indie publishing, you should never give away your copyright. And in traditional publishing, you don't give away your copyright. The work is copywritten to you, whether it be the art or the writing. This is something for some reason that I have to fact check a lot when talking to people. They think that once a traditional publisher publishes your work, they own the copyright, but they don't. The cool thing about traditional publishing is your work ends up in the Library of Congress and you maintain the copyright. If you actually ever wanted to resell it, like say it goes out of print, you want to resell your work, you own the copyright. Traditional publishing, they're paying you in advance against royalties, which I'll get into in a little bit, to actually have the right to publish your work. The negotiation that you have with them, it's only about the right to publish your work. If and when your work goes out of being published or the publishing house ceases printing your work, you get the rights back and you can sell your work again. In all of these avenues, you own the copyright and you should own the copyright. There are so many planes and helicopters right now. Sorry. Cons of traditional publishing. While places like Target and Costco can sell your books, it's not a guarantee that you would be in there. They have limited shelf space and they often reserve that shelf space for bestsellers, which can be frustrating if you're just like a mid-list author because your book's not going to be a bestseller and will probably not be sold in these sales channels. So getting into these sales channels is not guaranteed, even if you have a traditional publisher. Here's a doozy of a stat. Only about 25% of books ever really earn out their advance. So there's no guarantee that you will actually earn out your advance and make a living with this. Say you do. And when you do, you have to share your sales with the publishing house. It doesn't go 100% to you. That's not how an advance with royalties works. I'll explain that again in a minute. Not to mention the pay is weird. You're usually paid out if you do earn royalties twice a year, which can make it hard to budget, do taxes, and a lot of other things. You also don't know how much you're going to get when you do get those royalty checks. You can estimate it, but you never know the exact amount. And say you get into a book box or Target picks you up and your sales go through the roof, that can really mess with your taxes. I say this from experience, wonderful experience, but it still can be difficult to predict how much money you're going to make and therefore have a stable life with this because of that. Another con of traditional publishing is that when you do work with them, you are working with a team of people to promote your work and they have a lot of other books to promote. So sometimes books do not get the attention that many people think they deserve, including often the marketing teams. Things happen and another book might need more attention. Even though you might have the sales, marketing, school and library behind you, there's no guarantee that your book will be a bestseller, even with those teams behind you. The kind of biggest thing to remember with traditional publishing is that you're working with a huge company. So all the pros and cons that go with that are pretty much applicable here. As you can see, there's pros and cons to every single one of these publishing paths. There's not necessarily a perfect way to go through publishing a book. I tried my best to be as neutral as possible when describing all of these things because there are genuine and true benefits to every single one. But there are also some serious downsides to each one of these things. For the sake of this video, I'm going to be speaking mostly about traditional publishing, which is what I have most experience in. Because of the nature of independent publishing being pretty similar to traditional publishing, a lot of the things that I'm actually going to talk about work seamlessly for independent publishing houses, especially the bigger ones like Chronicle or Charles Bridge. I would even argue that some of the things I'm about to talk about actually work better for indie publishing. So just keep that in mind. And before you click off because you're thinking, well, I don't want to traditionally publish my work, I want to self-publish it, I really actually encourage you to keep listening because I've got a lot of things that I think are applicable to you because there's a lot of misinformation out there about traditional publishing. And if you're kind of curious about it at all, even if it's just to like fact check what you know, I really do encourage you to keep listening. This way you can decide what works best for you and figure out how you want to publish your work. Part 2. Who am I? Okay. You might be thinking like, who am I to be giving you all this information? If you're new here, my name's Lily Williams. I am an author and illustrator of many published works, including a nonfiction picture book series that was critically acclaimed and won several awards, as well as the author of some middle grade fiction graphic novels. I also have like other works in the works, but right now that's what's out there. I love to write and I love to draw, and I ended up on this path because I love storytelling so much. I'm speaking not only from a place of knowledge, having spent 12 years this year in publishing, but also as someone who's experienced a whole bunch of things during those 12 years. Also, author and illustrator events aren't typically super cut off as to who's there. As an author and illustrator, I've done a ton of different events with self-published authors, independent published authors, and anything in between. From self-publishing to traditional publishing, I've worked with a lot of different authors. So I'm speaking not just from a place of knowledge, having experienced many things in 12 years, but also having talked with and discussed my career and other people's careers with them, and they've had different experience than I do. So this is all to say that no matter how you're published, your worlds typically overlap with different people from different publishing avenues throughout your entire career. So a good rule of thumb is to speak kindly to anyone you meet and try not to be arrogant about which path is the best one, because the best path is going to be different for every single person because every single person and every single writer is different. Like I said, all of them have pros and cons, and you as a creative person get to decide what pros and cons work for you best. For me, I'm working in traditional publishing, but I don't necessarily think that that's the right path for every single person. My only caveat right now is you might be thinking, well, you didn't discuss academic publishing, and you are correct, and I'm not going to, and that's mostly because I've never done academic publishing. I don't know anything about it, and it would be inappropriate for me to speak on it. So if you're interested in academic publishing, I'm not going to talk about it, and sorry. If you are more interested in indie or traditional publishing, though, I have a lot of information for you. And now let's discuss the steps on how to make this happen. Part 3, traditional publishing steps. Step 1, finish your book, or finish your portfolio, or finish your dummy. Either way, finish the project you want to sell. According to a very old New York Times opinion article, an estimated 81% of Americans want to be authors. However, 81% of Americans are not authors. That's because finishing the book is arguably the hardest task. I recently made a vlog where I walk through the day my book is being submitted to editors after having worked on it for like 13 years. I talk about how many revisions you have to make your book a reality, and having to be so committed to the process that you believe in all of those revisions. So if you're curious about that, you can check that out. The thing is, you can't really query an agent or sell a book without a book. It's sort of how just like you can't get a grade on an assignment unless you finish the assignment. There are always exceptions to every rule, and there are exceptions to this rule. And I've literally been the exception to this rule, so I know that while I'm saying it, it's not necessarily always true. Your book can be bought on an idea alone, but you can't bank on being the exception to the rule, especially for the first time doing anything. You want to make sure you actually really commit to this because this is one of the most competitive industries in the world. Step 2, querying a literary agent. After your manuscript, if you're the author only, or your portfolio, if you're the illustrator only, or your picture book dummy, if you're the author and illustrator, is done, you will need to query a literary agent. There are many ways to find agents, including websites like Query Tracker or Agents for Illustrators. You want to compile a list of your top 10 agents. Make a query like they suggest. Each one will have different requirements for what they want in a query letter, and query package. Always make sure that the agent's actually taking submissions before you just email them, and then start the querying process. Don't be surprised if this takes months to years to accomplish. Don't be surprised also also if you have to query like 100 agents. This is really just a numbers game. And in an industry that is competitive, it's really about just like getting the numbers in. One of my friends that I teach at the Cuttlefish Academy with, Heather Brockman Lee, actually wanted to receive 75 rejections on her query search, which is an incredible amount of grit to get to that point. She luckily didn't have to receive that many rejections, but that was her goal. Step 3, hiring an agent. After you've queried an agent, you want to hire an agent. If an agent is interested in you, they will let you know by asking for more work or asking to talk to you. If they officially want to work with you, they will make you what's called an offer of representation. Your agent is the representation of you in the publishing industry. They're the person who is fighting for you. They're the person arguing contracts. So you would like to make sure that they're the right person for you. It's best for you to really take your time to decide when making your list and also contemplating how the conversation goes with each of the agents. You'll want this person to be the best representation of you as the forward-facing person who's often most directly engaging with the publishing house. You can pick someone who's tough, you can pick someone who's soft, but it really depends on what you want as a person and what you need in your corner. There are many different agents because there are many different writers. So once that agent has given you the formal offer of representation, you will sign documents that say that they are representing you and that they are your literary agent. It's industry standard that they don't take more than 15% of what you earn. For things like movie rights, they can take 20 to 30%. It just depends on the agency. But if you are signing with an agent and they say they take 30+% of what you earn, that's incorrect. Your agent gets paid when you get paid. Now is a pretty good time to mention that there are author and illustrators who don't work with agents. I want to remind you that even if you work in indie publishing, you're still working with a company. It's always wise to have an extra set of eyes on anything you're agreeing to, especially in formal writing like a contract. When you sell your book deal, you're going to be signing a contract. So having someone to look over all of that is pretty important. Not only do agents deal with contracts, but they also get to be the bad guy when you don't want to be. And they work with you editorially to get your work good enough to sell. So when you sign with someone, they will work to improve your work to get it good enough to sell. As I mentioned, each point on this path, you should celebrate every single point. But definitely when you sign with an agent, that is a point to celebrate. It's a huge deal. And it takes a lot of determination and a lot of rejection usually to get to that point. Step 4, working on your manuscript with your new agent. Congratulations, you have an agent. It's so cool. Now you and your agent will work on finessing your project, your manuscript, your portfolio, your book dummy into selling shape. This means anywhere from 1 round of revisions to getting the book right to sell, which could take many rounds of revisions. It took me 2 years working on my first book with my first agent to get it ready to sell. And with my most recent agent, it took 2 years worth of work on this project to get that book ready to sell. So really don't be surprised if this step takes time. There are agents that are more editorial, ones that are less editorial, depending on, again, what you want, but usually you do really work to get that project in selling shape. So depending on what type of agent is, you should at least factor in time for a line edit at this point, depending on how much or how little your agent is willing to be editorial. Step 5, submitting your manuscript to the publishing house. You and your agent will work together at this point to send your book out. Your agent and you will pick houses that you want to sell it to and which editors you want to sell it to. This is a great place where you can decide which publishing houses you want to sell it to in terms of like indie or traditional. And sometimes indie publishers, but not always, will offer lower advances, so that's again something to consider. Oftentimes lists from editors will have a mix of indie publishing houses and traditional publishing houses. There's not necessarily a traditional publishing only bias at these points of the process, which is where I say that a lot of things that were pros and cons for indie publishing were same pros and cons for traditional publishing. The cool thing about having an agent too is it's their job to have an ear to the ground on like who wants what and who's interested in certain projects and who might be interested even in you. So once that list of who you're going to submit it to is finalized, then your agent will submit your book to different editors and different publishing houses. Many things can happen at this stage, including an editor liking your book, an editor rejecting your book, or even a multi-house auction. But the cool thing about having an agent is your agent's going to guide you through all of this because they're experts in it. This is why you want to hire an agent who knows more than you. So you can lean on them in these moments, and you don't have to be the expert at this time. Step 6, get a book deal. Congratulations! You have a book deal. This is a point definitely to celebrate. You've been made an offer from a publishing house for the rights to print and distribute your work. Like I said earlier, the great thing about publishing is that you maintain the copyright to your work. The publishing house has the rights to print and distribute this work, not own it. Once the official offer comes through, your agent and the publishing house will go back and forth for a while. What they're doing is they're getting an agreement that they both mutually like on paper. This is your contract, and it will be negotiated. This process can take anywhere from a few weeks to A full year. You heard that correctly. I did just say a full year. This industry is slow. What do you expect from one of the oldest industries in the world? So once that contract is mutually agreed upon and signed, that's when you get paid the advance against royalties. And yes, this is another place to celebrate. Step 7. Work on your book. You and your editor will work on your book together. There's this misconception sometimes that editors just like copy edit a book and are only editing for the grammar, but they do a lot more, especially in traditional and larger indie publishing houses. Publishers will have a copy editor for later, and that person will come in at some point during the process, but your editor is here to make your book better and suggest improvements. They're basically also your in-house liaison for everything at the publishing house, any part of the publishing process. They are more than an editor. They are your guide to the entire process, and they will hold your hand through everything. They're also your touch point for any issues that might arise. If you're an author only who sold the manuscript alone, your editor will then work with an art director to hire an illustrator. You can suggest options for the illustrators, like if you like someone or you're friends with someone, and they will consider it, but ultimately it's who they want for the project and who they best feel is a fit. It's a conversation, but they also get to decide. That's where the editor gets to make like larger creative decisions with the art director. And if you've sold a dummy, which is an author and illustrated project, you will work with your editor and your art director if you sell a dummy, and they will both get your work into publishing shape. Editing can take a while. Like I was talking about with your agent, it can take anywhere from a small amount of time to a large amount of time. There will be feedback and you will think about that feedback, and sometimes you will even say, I disagree with that feedback and not incorporate it, but most often than not, you will probably incorporate it. And this process can go slowly because your editor isn't just editing your book, they're editing tens of books. Either way, your book is being worked on by multiple different people to make it the best book it can be. And you will have an editor and eventually an art director and a designer, and then eventually a marketing team and a sales team, and even a school and library team, especially if your book's a kid's book. And your team at the publishing house is getting your work pushed through all these different channels until it's perfected. And then one day, your book will be published. Step 8, your book will be published. Congratulations, you are a published author. Right before your book hits shelves, the book will be discussed by all the different team members many different times at the publishing house. And the publisher will pick a season for your book to come out. Then your book will go to print. And printing can take anywhere from 6 months to a year. Are you seeing that there's a lot of different time periods in here where you're just waiting? That's probably the weirdest thing about publishing, is especially if it's your full-time job and everyone has your projects, sometimes you just wait. But that can also be a pro. So then your book gets a publishing date, or some people call it a book birthday, and your book will appear on bookshelves everywhere. And thanks to the hard work of marketing and publicity, it will hopefully get trade reviews and be up for different awards. So you should definitely celebrate this step because this is a huge step. And if the publishing house has been talking to you, often you'll celebrate this step with a book launch. Book launches are when you talk to a local bookstore, either through you or your publishing house, and you celebrate when your book comes out. Sometimes, if you're really lucky, your book can be celebrated on a national scale with a national book tour. But you don't need to have a national book tour to celebrate that you did all this work and you went through all these different steps and you were rejected and now your book is out. At every single point you can, every single step that I have mentioned, you should celebrate, because getting your book published is hard. Part 4, my best advice. If I had to give people my biggest and bestest advice for this whole entire thing, here's what it is. It's that you should hire people who are more knowledgeable than you. These people will keep you safe, they'll make your art good, and they will be your allies at times when you need other people other than you thinking about this stuff. So you should use your gut when hiring them, because you should be able to lean on them. So when in doubt, my suggestion is to look up people and look up their companies and look up the agencies and see what they do. Cross-reference who they represent, cross-reference who they work with, ask around for more information, get a separate lawyer to look over your agency contracts, ask a peer, or even cold email someone. Get the information that you deserve, because you're hiring people who are going to represent you and work with you, and you want to know more about them. Mostly, you should listen to your gut. Okay. Earlier, I mentioned advance against royalties. What is an advance against royalties? Let's get into it. Part 5, advance against royalties. I would argue that this is like the number one thing you should know about traditional publishing. I've just told you a lot about traditional publishing and how to get published, but really you also need to figure out how to make this a sustainable thing for you. And part of that includes the money aspect of it. When your book gets acquired by an indie or traditional publishing house, what you are going to get is an advance against royalties. Sometimes that's just called an advance casually, but what it really means is advance against royalties. This means you'll get an advanced payment. For argument's sake, let's say it's like a standard book advance for $15,000. You never have to pay back that $15,000. it's yours. The advance is yours to keep for the rights to publish your work. That reminder, you maintain copyright on. Even if that book goes out of print, you still get this money and you still get to keep it. This money is yours. However, the publishing house isn't just giving it to you for funsies. They're giving it to you on the idea that you're going to earn out that $15,000. In order to earn out your advance, you will need to sell $15,000 worth of your book. So if you get $15,000 as your advance, you need to earn out that $15,000. Once you sell $15,000 of your book, you will get royalties. And once you get royalties, royalties mean you earn a percentage of every single book sold in perpetuity until it goes out of print. And royalty percentages can range from anywhere from like 1% to 20% per book. Yes. Once you earn out that initial advance money on your book, you will earn money on every single copy sold in perpetuity until it goes out of print. And if you're lucky, your book will never go out of print. That's why there are organizations like the Maurice Sendak Foundation. They manage the fact that his books are still selling and he's still making money on Where the Wild Things Are. Every single copy sold. Also, this is an argument for why you want royalties and don't want to do a flat fee for a book, because if your book does well, even if you do the cover art, you can still get royalties. What you're looking at is that this means passive income for author and illustrators potentially for life. It's not money for no work. And that's a misconception that a lot of people who are not in creative industries see it as. No, this is like security for life. I see it as being money for all the invisible labor that you put in those years you went to school, those years you were learning how to do this, those years you spent every single day after work writing the book. That's the benefit of this. I see it as payment for years of classes, education, and all that time spent after work writing and rewriting your book. Royalties are great for creatives. So this is why it's called an advance against royalties. Like I said, though, royalties are incredible. And this is essentially the system by which people who were on a sitcom once as actors, for instance, Friends, the actors from Friends get money on every single time that project is aired. And if you're thinking about like the writer's strike or the actor's strike, this is why they struck, because they weren't getting their fair share of royalties on streaming services. And there are other reasons, but that was a huge one. Actors and writers and illustrators are all in a very unpredictable money field, and it can be a huge gamble, which is why there are things like royalties that make the gamble worth it, that pay for the longevity of your career. I would argue that royalties are one of the biggest reasons that the arts work. And right now, many industries are doing away with the royalty system, which makes it virtually impossible to be a professional artist. And that's like a really big discussion for another time, and I can get very heated about that. Something I'm going to talk about here too, which I mentioned earlier, is that only about 25% of books ever earn out and get royalties. It isn't crucial to earn out to get another book deal, but it is better for the author and illustrator's career longevity if you do earn out. I personally see this as like a credit card system. Remember, you do get to keep the advance. So in that way, this analogy is not correct at all, but you do want to earn out your advance because it will make your credit score better. And this is where you as a creator and you with your agent get to discuss what's better, getting a really large advance and potentially never earning out, or getting a smaller advance with a higher likelihood of earning out. This is another one of those things where there's pros and cons to each one. Again, you have to make this sustainable for you as a creator. Smaller advances can be easier to earn out because you have to sell fewer books, while bigger advances give you more money to live on. And you can actually spend the time you need as a creative person to dedicate yourself to your craft. So like I said, there are pros and cons to each. There are arguments for and against big and small advances. And this is where you and your agent will have discussions on what works best for you as a creative. So ultimately, like I probably said for every single thing here, you and the people you work with want to figure out what's best for you and what's best for your career. But I'll remind you of what I said earlier, and that 25% of books earn out their advance. So royalties are never a guarantee. Part 6. What if I want to self-publish? Some of you watching might be like, yeah, this is all well and good, but I want to self-publish. That's what works best for me. And I'm not self-published, so I have a harder time talking to this point because I just have less knowledge about it. There's also a ton of great self-published resources online, from TikTok to YouTube videos, and you don't necessarily need me, who doesn't know that much about it, talking about it. There are more people with a more educated and practiced viewpoint on this, and I do recommend going to find those people. But I do still talk and run into a lot of self-published authors, like I was saying, at events or in the wild. So let me just leave you with a few thoughts on that from my perspective, having talked to and encountered and discuss this a lot. This can totally pay off big time, just like any path of publishing can. And there are some genres, like romance, for instance, that will have more success than others, like picture books, for instance. But it is often even harder for self-published authors to see monetary success. And it's because they have to do all their own marketing and printing, and they have to invest all their own money into this and time. Marketing takes a lot of time. But with the traditional publisher, they have teams of people you're going to work with who are going to do this for you. Like I said earlier, the teams of people will get your book into retail chains, get in front of reviewers, put you up for awards, make sure it's in libraries. And as a self-published author, you don't have the same access to those resources. Not just because people will ice you out due to prejudices, but also because you're just not going to have the same resources if you're doing it all yourself and you don't have all the connections and databases to get this information or time. But what I really want to talk about is that if you go the self-publishing route, you will need to hire an illustrator, either for your cover or if you're doing a picture book for the whole thing. And this is my soapbox with self-publishing. Artists are trained professionals, and their prices, like lawyers, doctors, landscapers, and plumbers, have set rates due to industry standards. According to the Graphic Artists Guild Guide, also referred to often as the gag guide by professionals, children's book illustrations go for no less than $150 a page, or $300 for a double spread. The cover is a separate price entirely and is not a page, but a cover. And I would argue that the gag guide is too low, that their prices have not kept up for inflation, especially the post-pandemic inflation. Nor would I argue that the prices have budged since like 1980. And again, I have a video on this, and I've talked about how artists' pay has not increased since the 80s and definitely is not adjusted for inflation. And that is a whole separate thing, and you can watch that on my channel. I would also say that that video is really necessary for anyone looking to hire an artist. But the reason this is like my biggest frustration is because I get asked this very regularly. I'm an illustrator with 12 years of experience in publishing. I also have experience in animation, and this is all to say that I have knowledge and expertise, and I value my time, and I charge accordingly. But as an illustrator, I get frequently asked by self-published authors if I can illustrate their work
for free
or
for exposure.
So I say this kindly, but from a place of deep experience. Whoever you hire to help you on your book, if you are self-published, you need to pay them fairly and appropriately for their time. Remember, this is your dream, not theirs. And their labor and time are worth something if you think your project is worth something. And also remember that a commission, like say you commission something from an artist, is not the same as paying them for their illustration, and that's due to distribution and printing rights. And artists charge differently for those things. So if you buy a commission and you're like, this would look great on the cover of my book, it's not the same because you didn't pay for distribution rights. You paid for a commission. Also, the risk that I see a lot about self-publishing is that this is some sort of get-rich-quick scheme. That's very common on TikTok and YouTube. There's so many videos about how you can like use AI to get this published quickly, or you can even use quick outsourced Fiverr labor to get this published quickly. And I would remind you that 1, AI is not copyrightable, your artwork is not going to be copywritten, and 2, a Fiverr artist is not being paid, again, proper compensation for their work. And yes, I guess you can quickly pump out work, but now you're also competing with AI doing the same thing. And I genuinely don't think that there's that much money in this, even though people on TikTok are like, you can make $12,000 a month with it. Maybe, but you're also entering an incredibly saturated market, and that's not for nothing.
Part 7, Conclusion.
In summation, ask people for advice, be kind to the people around you, value different perspectives as long as those different perspectives aren't causing harm, and finish that book. You're the utmost authority on what you want in your own projects. Well, I can tell you all the things I think, and I have. I'm not going to be able to make the right choice for you because I'm not you. Just like you're not going to be able to make the right choice for me. So you should trust your gut and what goes with what feels right to you and what you want from your career. In the end, I really do think if you do all these things, you'll be okay. You'll probably be more okay if you listen to yourself and what you want versus just taking some stranger's advice on the internet, especially if you weigh all the thoughts and opinions with careful consideration, choosing what's best for you. I really hope that this information was helpful. And if you have any more questions, feel free to drop me a comment and ask. If you want to hear more from me, check out my other videos and consider subscribing. And if you want to see my weekly newsletter, I put it out on Substack. It's called Planting Seeds. But most importantly, if you would like to support me and my livelihood, you can find my books anywhere books are sold. You can also pick them up from your local library. I am always so happy when people do that. Goodbye.